time goes fast. Today, this is the third and final day of the 2019 G20 Summit here in Tokyo. Thank you very much again for coming to attend this G20 Summit from all over the world and for your great contribution during the session on the first and second day. First, we would like to give you some flavor of the event, day 2, as a reflector of the day 2, so that mostly for those who didn't attend this day 2 and get some ideas. So I would like to ask Brianna to briefly explain the session and what has been discussed yesterday.
Thank you, Hideki. So what has day 2 left us? After the panels and the 7 sessions that we shared yesterday, we can point out some of the main highlights that we saw, that we shared and appeared in our dialogue yesterday. We firmly recognize the importance of leaving no one behind for the 2030 development agenda. We also highlight the importance of active engagement, and for that we assure as civil society that we need information and real information to work with. We also stress the need to have an effective and ongoing dialogue with the G20 working groups, not only in this C20 but also in all the incoming C20s that we're having ahead. We also point out the lack of effective implementation that the commitments done by the G20 countries are going this year and the following. Also the importance of accountability and having accountability mechanisms that the G20 countries should put into practice. And in this sense, the G20 should not only commit, but we also stress the need that they have to show progress and implementation of all these commitments. Also, we should go from general commitments to concrete special actions, to concrete national policy in all our countries. We also stress the importance of involving more, not only civil society organizations, but people in the making of policies back home. We also highlight the importance of always remembering that human rights must be at the center of all our interventions. And finally, we also stress the need to take action now, to be urgent in what we have to do from now on. So, thank you.
We'd like to begin the next session in a few minutes, but I'd like to go over a little bit about the program we are going to go through. And but my thought, I'm always amazed by the wide range of issues we are dealing with, ranging from that environment, climate change, gender issue, marine plastic waste, education financing yesterday, business and human rights, responsible business conduct, levy and unique aid, program conflict affected community, universal health coverage, and so on. This is kind of a unique aspect of C20 where forefront issues in the world could be discussed with in-depth analysis by many experts at the same time this C20 summit. So this type of discussion will continue today, rest of the C20 summit today. And I'd like to briefly go over today's session. The first session is called Message from Engagement Groups. Today we have 7 distinguished guests from all engagement groups. And then we will have high-level panel with G20 finance track. There are 2 tracks, as you know. The one is the Shepherd track, which was discussed yesterday. And as you know, G20 first started with the finance ministers and central bank governors in 1999. Then it was expanded to the G20 summit with those heads of the state from 2008 after the Lehman shock. From 11:30, we will have a keynote speech by Mr. John Christensen, who is the co-founder and chair of board, Tax Just Network, moderated by Hiroo Alba. And also, we are lucky to have Mr. Stefano Scapetta, Director for Employment, Labor and Social Affairs, OECD, for 10 minutes. So we have 2 guest speakers for keynote speech. Then after lunch, we will have 3 very interesting sessions. 5-way eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work. Responsible investment for quality infrastructure. And how we can, number 3, can we make a trade and investment sustainable and based on social justice and democracy. After coffee break, we will have closing session, which is continuity of C20 and future of civil society, which consists of 3 parts. Number 1 is a report from 3 breakout sessions on day 3. The next one is next steps for C20, continuity by representative of Troika. This time we are lucky to have the first C20 chair from Russia. When we started C20 in 2013, and maybe we could hear how the C20 started in Russia. Then finally, future of civil society by 3 Japanese speakers from 3 different areas, such as environment, from local to global, and digitalization. Followed by the closing remarks by C20, co-chaired by Atsuko Miwa, to close the C20 summit in Tokyo. So now we would like to begin the next session, message from the engagement group. I would like you, all the guests, to step up, come up to the stage, starting from the L20.
With us and join us to our C20 summit. We're very happy to have you. It is very important also to share with all the rest of engagement groups that have been working, as well as the C20 in the G20 process 2019. Is it very important because we also want to know what are the key messages. We know that some of you had already had your summit, some of them are preparing the summit for the G20. And we wanted to know which are the key messages that you are highlighting for the G20 leaders to read in the issues that you have been discussing in each of your engagement groups with all the actors that you have been engaging during this month. And so that's why it's very important for us to have you, and we would like you to share these important messages that you have for the G20 leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd like to start with Ms. Sharon Barrow, who is the General Secretary, International Trade Union Confederation, IT, so-called ITUC. She happened to be here in Tokyo to attend the employment working group as a guest from Civil Society Labor Union representative. Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to take advantage for her being here in Tokyo. Thank you very much. Please go to the podium.
Thank you. That wasn't a good start to the day. So, good morning. It's a delight to speak to the C20. Our civil society brothers and sisters are very important as we struggle to deal with the challenges of the world that you can only describe as fractured. If you look at the world of work, then... Okay, thank you. If you look at the world of work, then I can tell you that now, due to the exploitative development, due to the fact that new business models are not registered in the traditional way, so you have new and emerging digital businesses, platform work, unregulated work, we now have 60% of the world's workforce are actually in informal work. That really means they have no minimum wages, no guarantee of social protection, no rule of law, so no compliance or remedy available. That's not a way to build a sustainable economy. And then when you look at the fact that on top of a fractured world of work and an age where people are increasingly angry about their circumstances, we have the convergence then of climate and the devastating impact of extreme weather events we see today, but the urgency, we have just over 10 years to actually stabilise the planet. And of course, for the Labour community, we say very simply there are no jobs on a dead planet. So this is an urgency that we cannot walk away from. So climate for us, just transition to high ambitions around climate. We have just over 12 months to the 2020 summit, and so we need to act to pressure all our governments to take action, but we need to take action as well. So on climate, I would invite you to join us in the last week of June and indeed ask your employers for one thing, a conversation around how to climate-proof the workplace. It's about emissions, it's about jobs, it's about decent work. And then of course you have the fear of the rapid development of technology and a world that has no global standards around the regulation of privacy. You are asset owners of data, and yet your data is actually being mined without any kind of permission or value base to actually fuel the new monopoly powers of business in the database world. So we have a lot to do. And then there is the question of peace. We see countries rearming with mid-range nuclear weapons. We never thought it was possible. To my Japanese brothers and sisters, you have been the conscience of the world around nuclear non-proliferation and the treaty. Now we need to do much more to preserve that treaty, but to see the no-ban treaty come into force. So whatever the issues are for a stable, peaceful, democratic and just world, then we have much in common. I came this week because I wanted to talk to the Employment Working Group, the Labour Ministries, around what we call the new social contract. If you actually look at the breakdown in the social contract, this year, the International Labour Organisation, for those of you who know, this is a unique tripartite body, unions for workers, employers, and of course, governments. It sets global standards. It's 100 years old. 100 years ago, our forebears had a vision that said we must have a rights-based world. We must have fair competition. But in the 80s, with the growth of the current dehumanising supply chain model, we saw the social contract break down. With digitalisation, it is the tram tracks of the future, but without global rules, again, the employment contract is breaking down. So the issues we've been talking about, of course, are equal participation of women in the workplace, cleaning up the dehumanising work in our supply chains, securing employment which overcomes the increasingly precarious nature of work, informal work, new platform businesses, the atypical work of today, and of course reducing inequality with a proper distribution measure of minimum living wages, wages on which you can live with dignity, the question of collective bargaining to ensure equal distribution, and the dignity of safe work, secure contracts of employment. We will go to the Labour conference this year at the ILO, wanting a universal labour guarantee for all workers, indeed a broader social contract about some of the things I addressed, and universal social protection. For women, can I say, if we don't have universal social protection and minimum living wages, then you will never do anything about reducing the pay gap. And if we don't change the cultural base that still excludes women from equal participation, then we are not building a socially just world. Much work to do. We are partners in the quest for social justice. I thank you very much.
We also created a working group, labor and business human rights, and of course we have a gender working group addressing so very close relationship with labor G20. Thank you very much. And I'd like to ask next speaker, who is Mr. Katsunori Nemoto. Senior Managing Director, Japan Business Federation, better known as UPLAN. UPLAN is just hosted a B20 summit in March in Tokyo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wakabayashi-san, for your kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kazunori Yamamoto, Senior Managing Director of UPLAN, Japan Business Federation. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to represent B20's voice at this C20 summit. Today, I would like to share some key messages from Business Review. On 14th and 15th March, Keidanai hosted the B20 summit, receiving about 300 participants from all over the world, including Ms. Yuka Iwatsuki representing the C20. The overarching theme of the summit was Society 5.0 for SDGs. We held 5 panel sessions to discuss how to realize this future society and presented its joint recommendations to Prime Minister Abe. For those who are not familiar with Society 5.0, let me briefly introduce you the concept. Society 5.0 is based on the idea that human society is moving in the 5th stage. First, hunting society. Second, agrarian society. Third, industrial society. Fourth, information society. And the 5th stage will be the creative society. A combination of the digital transformation, imagination, and creativity of diverse people will make it possible to solve the social problems and create new values. Through realizing Society 5.0, we aim at achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by making the most of cutting-edge technologies. For this purpose, we call on the G20 to take concrete policy measures based on 7 principles, such as sustainable, inclusive, transparent, and so on. In our joint recommendations, we set out global issues to address in areas such as digital transformation, trade and investment, and energy, and the environment. Due to the time constraints, I would like to limit myself to 2 topics: integrity for all and business for all, which I believe will be most relevant to the C20's discussion. First, integrity. We underline the importance of the responsible business conduct and integrity at all levels. The fight against corruption must remain a priority. To address this issue, we need to have close dialogue with not only governments, but whole society. Among other things, in order to eradicate bribery, the top priority is to address both supply and demand sides, that is to say, the business and the government. In addition, transparency in public procurement should be ensured from that perspective of accountability. We would also like to draw your attention to B20 Business Voluntary Action Plan. We in business are not merely asking political leaders to make policies and measures. We are also willing to take proactive actions ourselves to transform this world to realize Society 5.0 SDGs. Against this background, we declared various initiatives, such as respect human rights and to integrate SDGs into corporate strategies. Through implementing these initiatives, we aim to create a win-win-win situation where all parties, that is, the seller, the purchaser, and society as a whole, would benefit. This is called Sanpo Yoshi in Japanese. Furthermore, we gathered over 80 tangible examples which clearly demonstrate B20's commitment towards Society 5.0 SDGs. In concluding my presentation, I would like to ask the C20 to consolidate partnership with other engagement groups, thereby enhancing momentum to realize Society 5.4 SDGs. Let's work together. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Of course, Business 20 is a very important partner for C20. We couldn't solve the social economic issues without the presence of business sectors. Thank you very much. We look forward to working together with you. And the third speaker will be Mr. Kazuhito Takeuchi. He's a Vice President, Science Council of Japan Nihon Gakujutsu Kaigi.
Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor and pleasure to be invited to this C20 summit. Particularly, the global academic communities are now insisting the importance of collaborating with the society. And therefore, I'm very pleased that we could share with you some sort of the outcomes from our S20 summit, which is Science 20. We organized in March this year. This is members of the S20 summit, composed of the leading academic organization of the G20 countries. And for this year, the Science Council of Japan, which is a representative from the Japanese academia, hosted the S20 summit at the Science Council of Japan. We had already the previous two S20 summits. First one in Germany in 2017 focuses on the issues of improving global health. And then followed by S20 Argentina 2018 focuses on the food and nutrition security. And what we try to discuss for this year is the threat to coastal and marine ecosystem and conservation of the ocean environment, particularly focuses on the issues of climate change, ocean acidification, as well as the marine waste, particularly marine plastic waste. And we adopted the joint statement, which were endorsed by S20 academics with the signature of the president. This is the scenery that we took when we organized the S20 meeting in Tokyo. Following the recommendation of the S20 Japan, studying the necessity of using of expert evidence-based advice, and second, developing actions aiming to reduce stresses on marine ecosystems, and three, establishment of more recycling and energy-efficient practices at national, city, and local level. This is a very important message from us because this is closely related with the circular economy issues of the terrestrial ecosystem. And fourth, capacity building for essential research infrastructure, and fifth, establishment of an improved data storage and management. And it's extremely important for the global community because of the lack of the knowledge on the ocean, and therefore the scientific community need to collaborate and exchange their views and ideas and also the information. And also, sixth, sharing of information gains through research activities. One of the key messages, it is important to take an action, but we do not know more about the current situation, how much plastics will increase in the future. So we need to simulate the future by utilizing our the sophisticated computer system. And therefore, science must be on the basis of solving of the marine environment. And we submit to the Ministerial meeting on energy transitions and global environment for sustainable growth, as well as the G20 Osaka summit itself. Particularly, we will contribute to the climate change issues as well as the marine plastic waste issues. This is a handover ceremony. We organized at the Prime Minister's office, and our statement was handed over by our President, Yamagiya, who is the President also of the Kyoto University, as well as to the Mr. Harada, of the Minister of the Environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Advancement of technology is indispensable for sustainable development in society. Thank you much. We would like to work together with the G20 also. Thank you very much. I'd like to show just one picture before going on. Yeah, please. Thank you very much. We'd like to move on to the next speakers. Mr. Naoyuki Yoshino, Dean, Asia Development Bank Institute. So ADB Institute is leading T20 within the framework of G20 engagement group. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me today. T20 is a Think 20, which is consisting of various think tanks in all over the world. Our Think Tank 20 is proposing everything based on evidence, either theoretical model or empirical estimations. And ADB Institute is one of the head groups, together with JIIA, Japan Institute of International Affairs, and IIMA, Institute of International Maritime Affairs. So those are the three institutions we are doing together. And SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, is one of the most important topics. Especially infrastructures are very important. Water supply, electricity, they are lacking in many Asian countries. And we have been advocating public-private partnerships in infrastructure investment, which means we have to bring private sector finance into infrastructure. However, it was not so successful because infrastructure relied on user charges. Water supply, user charges comes from water price. Then people cannot pay so much high prices. But in order to attract private investment, the rate of return has to be very high. However, the water supply can create big spillover effects into the region. Property values will increase, corporations start their own business, and their employment will be increased. Then various tax revenues along this water supply can be created. And in the past, all those tax revenues went into the government, and they were not returned to infrastructure investors. If part of these spillover tax revenues were returned to infrastructure investors, then the rate of return will become much higher. Then we can attract lots of private finance. Especially in Asia, pension funds and insurance are growing. Then they are the very good sources of finance to circulate within the country. Secondly, digital economy, digital technologies has been developed very well. If the digital technology can be applied to education, in many Asian countries there are lots of mobile phones, then best education can be provided through digital technology. Then students who are living in remote islands, they can access to top education by utilizing of these digital lectures. And financial technology is affected by also development of technology. We can buy various financial products from all over the world. In any countries, they can access to finance to globally. Then financial education is very important. Otherwise, many people will just lose money using digital technology. Asian population is far ahead in Japan and followed by Korea and China. And in our study shows when the population is aging, traditional monetary and fiscal policy those effectiveness will drastically diminish. That is why Japan has suffered for 20 years. The best solution is to make elderly people to work longer, and then wage rate should be based on productivity. So many people are talking about female participation in the labor market, but the senior citizens' participation into the labor market based on productivity wage rate are most important into Japan. And SME, small and medium-sized enterprises, and startup businesses are also difficult in many Asian countries. There is no development in capital market, bank-dominated society. Then SMEs used to be very difficult to borrow money. However, digital technologies, we can find out that credit rating for SME by use of big database. And startup business is also another important issue. And crowdfunding, hometown investment trust funds, was created in Japan 20 years ago. It has expanded to Peru, Vietnam, Cambodia, and selected Asian countries. Then hometown crowdfunding is very suitable for female startups. And most of the success stories of startups by use of hometown crowdfunding is with women. So that will encourage them to participate into the labor market. Lastly, governance and anti-corruption is very important, especially related to infrastructure investment. I think the role of multilateral institutions such as World Bank, ADB, will be very important to put their certain fraction of money into infrastructure investment. That will make the transactions into much more transparent and also monitor that corruption can be avoided. So those are the main topics that we are handling together. And lastly, our T20 will be held May 26 and 27 in the same room as here. So if you we have time, you are always welcome to our T20. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yoshino. And I think evidence-based approach is very important. I'm considered to be an old man. I don't know my productivity is, but I'm still working on it as CSO. Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce the next Tsuyoshi Yamamoto. He is a special advisor to the governor of Tokyo Metropolitan Government. U20 is a new engagement group approved by the G20 this year. Thank you very much, please.
Good morning. First of all, on behalf of the members cities of the Urban 20, let me express a deep gratitude for inviting me to speak about our group at this Shibu 20 summit. As introduced by the moderator, the Urban 20 is the newest engagement group which was launched in December 2017 by the joint initiative of the mayors of Buenos Aires and Paris. And currently 29 cities located in the G20 countries are the members of the Urban 20. With the rapid advancement of the urbanization, as you know that the cities as major hubs of economic activities, innovation, energy consumption, and demographic concentration have become one of the key players in the global sustainability and the inclusiveness agenda. So by creating a new space for major cities to discuss and develop a common position on global challenges, we very much would like to send to the G20 leaders the cities' voices, cities' local experience and contributions. So our ultimate goal is to work together with G20 to explore concrete policies and actions to create a better world. In October last year, the first G20 Urban 20 Mayor Summit was successfully held in Buenos Aires, and the communique comprising 17 recommendations was handed over directly to Mr. Macri, the President of the Argentine Republic and the Chair of the G20. Now let me very briefly introduce the Tokyo Urban 20 Summit, which will take place on 21st and 22nd next month. Urban 20 Tokyo is a 1.5 days event beginning with the welcoming reception on the evening May 20th and concluding with announcement of the Tokyo communique in the late morning May 22nd. Up to today, we have confirmed the participation of the representatives from the 31 cities, including some observer cities. We feel very much happy that we can count on the attendance of 13 mayors or governors coming from Asia, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which I'm sure that will contribute to enhance the profile of this Unipo engagement group. We plan to have 6 sessions in total during the Urban 20 Tokyo, namely climate action, circular economy, social inclusion, and sustainable economic growth, gender equality, and SDGs. These sessions are joined by 3 to 4 participants, mayors or vice mayors. Now the priority agenda. As well as following up the discussion at the Buenos Aires summit, we hope to take up some new issues which Tokyo thinks important and urgent, like the problem of the rapidly aging society and how cities can deal with the challenges caused by the aging populations. And we would also like to include a few priority issues which we understand to be highlighted at G20 Osaka summit, like the issue of plastic waste. So prior to G20 Osaka, we will discuss those issues from local perspective and try to give some useful advice to the G20 leaders. And as a result of those considerations, we have selected 3 priority areas as seen in the slide. The first priority topic is the climate change. In this topic, cities are going to discuss the level of the ambition and to call on the G20 leaders to commit to more ambitious goals for GHG emissions, which will be while fully taking into account the city's contributions. And in addition to that, we hope to make this Urban 20 Tokyo a good opportunity for the cities to exchange and share their own innovative ideas and measures tackling both mitigation and adaptation. The second priority topic is the social inclusion. The goal of the Urban 20 is to achieve more inclusive, peaceful society. So in this topic, we hope to discuss how cities can promote equality in economic opportunities, access to social service, and political participation, regardless of race, gender, social status, religion, disability, and sexual orientation. In this agenda, Tokyo hopes to future the necessity of proactively addressing problems caused by aging society. The third priority is the sustainable economic growth. As you know, the world is currently experiencing rapid technological change called the fourth industrial revolution. Emerging technologies such as AI, IoT, and big digital data are significantly changing our society, and they are bringing both opportunities and challenges to cities in tackling urban challenges. So in this topic, we hope to discuss how we can harness digitalization and the emerging technologies in order to realize inclusive economic development. In concluding, let me thank you again for giving me the chance to speak about the Urban 20 here. Urban 20 is a newcomer to the family of the engagement groups, so I'm sure that there are many things that we can learn from the experience and expertise of the other engagement groups. Our purpose is to leverage huge potential for the major cities as hubs of diversity and innovation for the purpose of tackling global challenges. But this mission cannot be carried out without having a close collaboration with civil society. So we, the Urban 20, appreciate very much the deepening collaborative relationship with G20. Thank you very much. Please come to join our meeting next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The newest engagement group, and we look forward to it. We share the same issues, social inclusion, economic growth, and climate action also. Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you. So next speaker is Ms. Meguro Yoriko Meguro, W20 Japan Committee co-chair. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting W20 to see G20 Summit. W20 Japan 2019 Communique Framework can be characterized as follows. Upgrading our target for implementation from women's inclusion to gender equity, making the commitment visible through implementation of policy recommendations. Governance as a new pillar and a cross-cutting concept. Other pillars handed over from the previous chair countries are labor, digital, and finance. And instituting monitoring process is effective and crucial for holding G20 leaders accountable to W20 communicate and for accelerating change. W20 Summit in Tokyo was held at the same venue and time with the World Assembly of Women hosted by Japanese government in March 22 to 24 this year. We handed our communique to Japan's Prime Minister Abe on March 23rd at our W20 Summit 2019 in Tokyo. And this is the bottom. Now, the next one, please. The overarching position of W20's recommendations to the G20 leaders is that the W20 endorses the Buenos Aires G20 Leaders Declaration, stating that gender equality is crucial for economic growth and fair and sustainable development, and that the W20 takes particular attention to the inclusive and responsible use of all technologies, including AI, due to their critical impact on all segments of society, ensuring no one is left behind. There are 7 recommendations from W20, some of them with a specific to-do list, and they are aiming at women's empowerment and gender mainstreaming, namely not only targeting SDG 5, but many other gender-related goals. Sorry. Yes, thank you. The first recommendation requests state leaders to report on the 2014 Brisbane commitment. This is the genesis of the W20. From the second to fourth recommendation on labor, the digital gender gap, and the financial issues, request systemic changes. The fifth and sixth recommendations are more focused on normative dimensions, though systemic transformation is assumed as a necessary condition. The last recommendation is on governance. This is all about democratic governance. So, lastly, what do we need to do toward G20 Summit 2019 and beyond? Well, we can all think about advocacy is necessary. It's amazing how little engagement groups, the role of the engagement groups are known, at least in Japan. So advocacy to influence that and stakeholders is very important. And strengthen shared commitments. We think we have a commitment, strong commitment, but we need to continue to keep it and even make it stronger. Recommendations are only on paper, if not implemented. So we need to monitor policy implementations and take actions for normative transformation through SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amelo-san. And historically, please have a seat. And C20 has been working closely together with W20. And we share the agenda. Of course, it's about one of the major issues within C20. And we look forward to working together with you. And last speaker will be Mr. Chiba, Y20 Summit 2019 Chairman, G7, G20 Youth.
Hello, my name is Soichiro Chiba. I'm currently the chairman of the Y20 community. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Y20, it is an engagement group of age under 40 who have actually a profession in the G20 topics. So this is the details of the Y20 summit that we're hosting at the end of May. We're hosting it from May 26 to May 30. We have 3 topics, which are international trade, business and environment, and future of work. So for those of you who are interested in this summit, please feel free to contact me after this presentation. Although you may no longer be a youth anymore. It doesn't really matter. So I have been thinking today, what things should I share? We have a lot of policy recommendations regarding the 3 topics, but today I would like to share one policy recommendation that we think that is relevant to the C20, which is increasing the numbers of students studying abroad within the G20 countries. We came to implement this policy recommendation because, first of all, we found out that the Japanese students studying abroad, the absolute number has been declining in reverse of the global trend. Even if you look at the number per capita of the global number, and the growth rate has been decreasing. But since last year in Buenos Aires G20, there was a declaration that we should promote number of students studying abroad in order to promote economic growth and also mutual understanding. So let me go to the policy recommendation. So the common perception was the economic factor. Many people, including the Japanese government, thought that it was the economic factor. Basically, GDP growth is declining, people want to save money, so that's why people don't study abroad. But we conducted a quantitative and qualitative analysis and found out that actually economic factor has very little correlation. The determined factor was what corporations value, how corporations value the international experiences. For example, let me briefly explain an example of Korea, Greece versus the case of Japan. Again, we have a lot of cases, but because of time constraints, let me limit it to here. So Korea and Greece are the countries to send studying abroad, that ranks in the top 10 in terms of the numbers of students studying abroad. In return, Japan ranks in the low 60th. But if you compare the economic status of these 3 countries, you can see that there's very little correlation. But if you see how the corporations value the experiences of studying abroad and maybe the unique skill sets, you will see a significant reason. For example, in the Korean corporation, because perhaps part of the reason is because it's really hard to get a job in Korea right now. Korean corporations send a clear message that actually multinational experiences and other unique skill sets are welcomed in order to get a job. In return in Japan, because we have a very unique corporate culture based on lifetime employment and seniority wage system where you seldom get fired, corporations expect to train employees inside the corporation rather than acquiring people with a unique skill set or students who have a multicultural experience. Well, it's not a negative thing, but it's not a huge plus in order to get a good job in Japan. So, as you can see, we have cases of a lot of other countries, but we found that through quantitative and qualitative analysis, corporations' value and how that value is effectively delivered to the public is actually a determined factor of increasing in terms of the numbers of students studying abroad, at least in one country. So we came to think that countries shall cooperation shall start to increasingly evaluate those multicultural experiences and unique skill sets and effectively deliver that message to the public in order to tackle this issue. So this is one policy recommendation that we thought that is can provide a quite unique perspective from the youth to the G20, and this was just one example. So, as I mentioned, let me stop here. We have a lot of policy recommendations regarding environment and international trade, also future of work. As I mentioned, we are an engagement group of age under 40. We do have students, but we are highly, most of the policy recommendations are based on analysis as the think tank 20, but we are a little bit younger. So let me limit it to here. Thank you very much for listening, and for those of you who are interested in the Y20 Summit held next month, please do attend. It is a public event like this C20, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kimura. I don't know the definition of the youth, but as long as you feel that you're part of I'm youth, please join that summit. Maybe not myself. This is the end of the session, but I'd like to show two pictures because C20 is also one of the engagement groups. I tend to forget I'm engagement too. So for those who have not attended past 2 days, we had a chance to visit the minister's office to hand over our policy pack to Prime Minister Abe. So originally, he was trying to attend the day 2 yesterday to attend the C20, but unfortunately, he left for the European countries and the United States yesterday. But sorry, actually. So Yuka, C20 chair, and 2 other civil society organizations, Valeria Nufu from Saudi Arabia, handed over to Prime Minister. Next one is, okay, 10 people together, including myself, and we had a good discussion with Prime Minister Abe, and thank for giving this kind of opportunity to work with. So thank you very much, and it's about time to just 10 o'clock, and it's the end of this session, and I'd like to ask you to give big applause to those we'd like to invite next moderators, Yumiko Orie and Hiro Awa, to begin the next session, which is high-level panel with G20 finance track. Orie-san, Awa-san.
So soon we will be starting the G20 finance track high-level session. Would the panelists please come up and sit on the stage? Good morning, everyone. Welcome all to the G20 finance track high-level panel. My name is Yumiko Horie, Save the Children Japan, who will be moderating this session together with Hiro Aoba of Public Services International. So as we all know, the G20 has 2 working tracks of Sherpa track and the finance track. And yesterday there was a rich discussion with the sous Sherpa of the Sherpa track, Mr. Tsukada, covering a wide range of issues from inequality, anti-corruption, global health, climate change, and civil society engagement. So today we have a distinguished speaker representing the G20 finance track, whose primary focus is on global finance and economic system, such as monetary and fiscal policies, infrastructure development, investment, financial regulation, financial inclusion, international taxation, and so forth. And also for this year, the Japanese government has taken this unique initiative to link the finance track with the global health. So today, we have the honor of having Mr. Takashi Miyahara, the Deputy Director General of International Bureau of Ministry of Finance, and also 6 representatives of civil society who are experts of diverse sectors. So hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion. So firstly, I would like to ask Mr. Miyahara to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Maria-san. And good morning, and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor and pleasure to be given an opportunity to make remarks this special occasion. Please allow me to express my sincere gratitude to the G20 Secretariat for this opportunity. Today, I would like to share with you some thoughts behind the priority items of the G20. I guess that, well, as already introduced to my colleague of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs already shared with you a general overview of the G20 agenda. So I will focus on issues that have been now being discussed in the finance talk. Before jumping into our agenda, let me sketch out some background. The recovery of the last several years, meaning economic recovery of the last several years, is losing momentum actually. And the risks are increasingly tilted to the downside. In recent months, the global expansion has weakened further. While such macroeconomic climate deserves close monitoring, of course, the real challenges lie in a number of more structural problems. Aging is progressing in not only advanced economies, but also emerging and developing economies as well. The massive gaps in infrastructure investment and social welfare services have been a bottleneck for inclusive growth in a number of countries. Climate challenges is often cited as a deep-root cause of an increased frequency and severity of natural disasters across the globe. Moreover, technological innovation such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and crypto assets has forced a rethink of our economic policies. The validity of the current financial regulation, tax systems, and other policy toolkits are increasingly being tested. Against these backgrounds, this year, we have proposed 3 pillar priorities for the G20 finance track under the Japanese presidency. Namely, first, we assess the risks and challenges to the global economy, such as global imbalances and the impact of aging. Second, we help accelerate actions to strengthen growth potential by promoting investment both in infrastructure and human capital. And third, we have taken up issues on policy responses to economic and social structural changes stemming from technological innovation and globalization. Here, let me elaborate on these priorities. First pillar. Let me start with the first pillar, the risks and challenges to the global economy. As you recall, the current G20 was revamped right after the global financial crisis as a forum to promote crisis response and preparedness. Now that 10 years have passed since the global financial crisis, we currently focus more on economic and structural policies in normal times. The G20 finance track's primary mission during the non-crisis period is surveillance, economic surveillance, as I mentioned. As the premier international forum, economic forum, that represents more than 80% of the global economy. For the G20, the monitoring imminent global economic risks is a president matter. We continue to work closely with each other to detect potential crises before they materialize. Two specific challenges that we, G20 presidency, have suggested exploring global imbalances and aging. On global imbalances, we are encouraging the G20 members to collectively tackle the causes of persistent, large external imbalances, as they can be best addressed through multilateral cooperation rather than bilateral trade measures. In this exercise, we pay particular attention to structural dynamics behind the saving investment imbalances, such as excessive corporate savings and the impact of demographic changes. Aging is another topic that we are investigating into. You might think that this topic was selected because Japan is, only because Japan is the fast aging country. Admittedly, it is true. However, let me remind you that Japan is not alone. I would like to turn your attention to the fact that in the longer run, aging will be an emerging big problem for not only relatively old countries, but also young countries in terms of demographic landscape. As the latter group is often rapidly aging. We are inviting the members, G20 members, to discuss policy implications of aging from various angles, such as monetary and fiscal policies, labor supply constraint, and financial inclusion. As the second pillar, the G20 finance track is discussing actions to strengthen medium-term growth potential, such as investment in both physical infrastructure and in human capital. The Japanese presidency is of the view that the G20 should continue to promote the quality infrastructure investment agenda as a way of boosting economic productivity. Quality infrastructure brings positive economic and social spillovers over the long run, beyond the face value of physical infrastructure itself. Specifically, the quality infrastructure helps mobilize private sector capital further and form solid basis for sustainable growth by generating jobs, building capacity, and transferring technologies. We also extend our discussion beyond investment in physical infrastructure to investment in human capital. A robust financing structure to promote universal health coverage in developing countries is one of the key items under this agenda. I will get back to these two issues in more detail later. Further, we have proposed that G20 discuss how to address rising debt vulnerabilities in low-income countries, which have raised great concern in the international community these days. We continue to enhance our joint efforts made by borrowers and creditors, both official and private, so as to enhance debt transparency and ensure debt sustainability. Third, we have taken up policy responses to address economic and social changes stemming from technological innovation and globalization. It is important to reap their benefits while containing the associated risks. Particularly, the existing international taxation framework needs to be reviewed and modernized, if appropriate, in the face of digitalization and globalization. On the financial sector, the presidency suggests that the G20 starts to consider problems arising from fragmented financial markets. Here, let me move on and spend the next several minutes by digging deeper into a couple of policy issues that might be of particular interest to you, namely the quality infrastructure investment and the universal health coverage financing. First, quality infrastructure. Despite increased spending on infrastructure, the world still faces a massive gap in financing for infrastructure investment. For instance, the Global Infrastructure Hub, an information hub which the G20 actually created several years ago, estimates a cumulative gap in infra investment amounting to $15 trillion from 2017 to 2040. Aiming to secure the amount of spending to cover this gap is undoubtedly important. However, that tells only part of the story. We also need to care about the quality of infrastructure investment. If a large amount of money pours into developing countries, but infrastructure is not resilient enough against natural disasters, such investment will end up with higher life cycle cost. Also, we should think about the benefits of infrastructure investment to local economies, such as job creation, transfer of know-how, and capacity building. This is actually nothing new. All these virtues of quality infra investment were already agreed on at the G20 level. In 1960, in G20 Hangzhou Summit under the Chinese presidency, the G20 leaders agreed on certain concepts of quality infra investment. Now it is time to upgrade these concepts. In other words, elevate them to a set of principles. Throughout this process, we are considering adding new elements or the virtues of quality infrastructure. Such new elements could include more accessibility to infrastructure, and transparency, and sound infrastructure governance, including macro-level debt sustainability. Bearing these thoughts in mind, Japan has made quality infrastructure investment a priority of the finance track this year. We intend to push forward this agenda in a holistic manner by not only establishing new high-level policy agreement as principles, but also preparing the guidance to practitioners on the ground. By practitioners, I mean policymakers and the officials in charge of the implementation, or investors in infrastructure projects. We will also consider creating a database of various measures, financial measures, which support quality infrastructure investment, both bilateral and multilateral. Next, let's move on to the issue of global health and the universal health coverage finance in particular. And some of you may not be very familiar with this topic. Let me briefly explain the importance of the UHC and its value for the finance ministry's discussion. First of all, the universal health coverage is the idea that we should aim to ensure all individuals receive adequate health services without encountering any financial hardship. Now, many developing countries are still facing difficulties in addressing this challenge. It is time to push forward a move toward the UHC for the purpose of sustainable development. Sustainable and inclusive development, I should say, in line with national context and priorities. Achieving the UHC would improve the health of the working population and thus pave the way for self-sustaining growth. In addition, it would grow a solid middle class who would be able to pay more taxes and potentially leading to an increase in or leading to a sounder public finance. Furthermore, it would strengthen prevention and preparedness against health emergency events, by which enhancing global and regional health security. You may hear from our colleagues, you may have heard from colleagues of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that the G20 Sherpa track also discusses the UHC. In the finance track, we will focus, or we are focusing on its financing aspects and in the context of the development interests. Establishing a solid health financing scheme is essential for supporting a move toward UHC. However, this mission cannot be completed by health authorities and the health ministry in particular alone. Here, finance ministers have a critical role to play in designing the scheme and securing resources. Thus, the UHC finance, if not universal health coverage per se, is a matter of legitimate concern for finance authorities. Moreover, the need to address pressures on the health system arising from aging also makes a strong case for the nexus between the health system and its financing. It is in this context that the presidency will, or actually hosting a joint session of G20 finance and health ministers in the margins of the Osaka summit. This event will be held as a walking dinner on June 28th. So, in closing, let me emphasize that the G20 will continue to listen carefully to voices from various engagement groups, including certainly the C20. Government views in the G20 can be complemented and enhanced by the views of the civil societies. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miyahara, for your comprehensive report on the position of the G20 finance track. Okay, now we are going to move to the next sections. So we are going to have a comment or presentations. Sorry, it's only 4 minutes each for 6 representatives from civil society. So let's start with Mr. Julian Meyer, representing the C20 Trade and Investment Development Group.
Yeah, thank you very much. From our point of view, we clearly welcome that the Japanese G20 presidency has put economic imbalances on and the need to address them on this year's summit's agenda. Huge deficits, huge surpluses are assigned, and there are global imbalances that have the potential to create trade conflicts. We see that already within the G20. Germany has record trade surpluses, and the United States has record trade deficits. And the consequences are also visible. In almost every democratic G20 member state, we see visible public discomfort with globalization as we have it. And the trade agreements, however, that are in the pipeline by all the governments of the world, they want more of them. And they, of course, follow the same priorities of the old free trade agreements, whose impacts we already know. And it's no surprise that the consequences of the free trade agreements that are still in the pipeline will, of course, be the same. If you follow the same priorities, if you have the same policy guidelines for these trade agreements, you will get the same results. And let me show you a few examples of what that means. Let us look at the agricultural sector. It's one of the sectors that will be most heavily affected by the new free trade agreements. And family farms, small-scale farms, feed 70% of the world's population, yet they're in crisis all over the world. Most migrants are farmers who can no longer survive. Agribusiness, highly subsidized agribusiness corporations from the north are flooding the developing countries' farm markets. If you look at West Africa, they have basically now a market where European agrarian agricultural exports dominate the market, and now the Europeans are very surprised that there are so many migrants from West Africa trying to come to Europe. Why is that the case? It's not much of a surprise. These people have no economic possibilities to survive in agriculture at home anymore. So further globalizing agricultural markets is not a good idea. It is not good for the farm sector of the world, and I would say it makes sense to have a global market in smartphones, but it is nonsense to have a global market in milk. Another sector that will be heavily affected by these free trade agreements is the service sector. Services are an area where globalization has already begun, but there's still a lot where markets are not yet open. Where it happens, you see the results: low-wage sectors, cutthroat competition, and a lot of informal employment of the type that Sharon Burrow just mentioned earlier this morning. The question that civil society all over the world has is, why should it be a good idea that French corporations take over the water supply of Japanese cities? Why should it be a good idea that German supermarket chains go to India and displace millions of retailers in India? Why should it be a good idea that American media corporations should take over radio stations in your country? Why should it be a good idea that multinationals are competing with local enterprises over public procurement, taxpayers' money that should be better spent in the local economy rather than go to the shareholders of multinational corporations, shareholders that are already rich enough and apparently can never be rich enough in their own view. They always want more and more and more. The logical consequences are all these imbalances that we have seen today and that we are going to see in the future even more. The solution to these problems, however, is not the debate of free trade versus protectionism. My country first is not the solution, but also it's not the polarization that we actually have. The question is not so much how protectionist are we, because every country is a little bit protectionist, and the question is also not how much free trade do we have, because we always will have trade. The question is how sustainable and how just are our economies. Are we going to move towards more justice, but towards more sustainability in our economics, or are we continuing the old neoliberal path? Trade is a function of economic policy. It's not independent of economic policy. And for the last 25 years, what we have done is we have deregulated, we have globalized, and we have removed barriers to trade. For the next 25 years, what we have to do is re-regulate in the public interest, towards sustainability, and we have to remove barriers to justice and barriers to sustainability. That is more important than removing a little bit more trade barriers, and that is, I think, the challenge that all the economies in the world will see when we are going to implement Agenda 2030. Agenda 2030 and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals cannot be continued if you continue with removing trade barriers and build up barriers to sustainability and justice. So I think despite the fact that the details of a more sustainable and more just economic policy will always be different in every country, I think civil society all over the world agrees on that. And finally, I would like to mention a few things about multilateralism. We're all in favor of multilateralism, but the multilateralism of the WTO has all too often been used to constrain democratic policy making in member countries. And that, of course, is an abuse of multilateralism. Multilateralism is a good thing, but it also has to give every member state a policy space to pursue its own way to sustainability and justice. And trade agreements that prevent that are opposed by people all over the world, and I think they're right in doing so. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We are going back to you to ask you to address a question to Mr. Miyahara later, but it's amazing that you could breathe, actually. I don't know how you breathe, but the next person is Mr. John Christensen, representing a tax loss network.
Yeah, thank you. I think G20 needs to pause and think very carefully. I agree with everything that's just been said. We talked about a recovery, a very modest recovery, but a recovery for whom? Because the benefits of the economic recovery in the last 3 years have not benefited the vast majority of people. The benefits have flowed quite clearly to a very small minority. And I think the G20 has not fully understood that their programs, the reforms, have not benefited the vast majority, and the risks are as great as ever. I work as an investigative economist, work with financial journalists, talking to regulators and compliance people and risk analysts. It is clear and should be clear to everybody now that the risks we are facing at this moment in the global financial markets are as great as at any stage in 2006, 2007, 2008. And the reforms that have been undertaken have not gone nearly far enough. We still have fragmented regulation, in some cases, in some countries, dozens, even hundreds of different regulators doing different tasks. There is very little systematic cooperation between them. We are seeing audit failures systematically, or we are seeing audit failures in many countries, partly because of an oligopoly in audit functions, but also because of conflicts of interest in the private sector between audit work and consulting work, including tax consulting work, and this is systemically endangering us. We are also seeing bank boards, the same old bank boards of directors and non-executive directors coming from the same rather limited gene pool, who are systematically ignoring the long-term risks presented by climate change. And it's not just civil society that are flagging it up, central bankers are flagging it up as a major risk to the future, because our banks quite simply do not understand the risks confronting them. They've proven to be very bad at understanding risks. I would also say, from a personal capacity, from my own observations working with journalists around the world, we still face the same political and regulatory capture risks that we were seeing 10, 15 years ago, and that remains a problem. I'd also like to flag up, and this is a new risk, which is perhaps peculiar to my area of interest, the arrival of cryptocurrencies presents massive regulatory and anti-money laundering risks and risks of tax evasion. I think that this is a matter that needs to be urgently looked at as well. You haven't mentioned the international trade negotiations. One of the areas where I'm particularly concerned is in trade negotiations around financial services. I have been trying to follow this for many, many years, as have many other journalists and economists. Good luck to anybody who's trying to follow this, because these negotiations happen in great secrecy. It is almost impossible to find out what's going on, but what I think is going on is a huge pushback against regulation, and I am very worried indeed that the United States and the United Kingdom are pushing for for access to other markets on a highly deregulated basis, which will threaten the entire prudential management of economies by ministries of finance. And I think the failure to understand the prudential risks posed by financial market deregulation and by these new trade deals is a chronic failure on the part of G20. On the issue of transparency, and I've only got a minute, but I'm going to go through this very fast, we have still not seen public registries becoming the norm, even though G20 committed to this. We're only seeing partial observation of country-by-country reporting by multinational companies, and we lack, it says time's up, we lack an international financial reporting standard on tax treatment, which is undermining the ability of national tax authorities. So we have a long way further to go before we can say we have gone beyond the period of systemic risks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Especially, I thank you for representing not just the Tax Justice Network, but also International Financial Artists Working Group, because you raised the issue of financial regulation and issues surrounding the financial market. I thank you for that. Next person is Mr. Peter Matthews.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to focus on quality infrastructure investment. I have a few slides. I hope they will be, you can see them as I'm talking to them. If you think about all the great global challenges that we face, if it's fighting poverty, dealing with the effects of climate change, rebuilding our economies, achieving food security, all of these issues require investment in infrastructure. But as the Deputy Director General pointed out, it's estimated that there's a $15 trillion investment gap between now up until 2040. That's a huge sum of money. The G20 response to this, until recently, until the introduction of quality infrastructure investment, has been focusing on establishing infrastructure as an asset class. What that means in summary terms is standardizing the way that investments are brought to market to encourage more private participation and more private investment. There was an excellent critique of that approach developed last year by the C20 under the Argentinian presidency. And I would really recommend that G20 absorb some of the lessons from that work. While still on the global context, one of the other characteristics that we identified is infrastructure investment has geopolitical influence. I think it's probably the Chinese Belt and Road investments that have really served as the catalyst for this. But we've seen a number of responses to this from the Europeans with their connectivity strategy, Japan, various strategies, the Indo-Pacific strategy, also the Japanese government indicating signs of collaborating with the Chinese as well, response from the US government. This is a very important development. It's not the first time that there has been global competition around investing in infrastructure. If you look at the colonial era, the investment in infrastructure was around the extraction of natural resources, trying to connect markets, and people were left behind. So we have some experience of this. We're not returning to that time, but we certainly need to be aware of some of the risks associated with that. The indebtedness has already been mentioned, skewed priorities when you are looking at access, for example, to natural resources, problems around indebtedness. So we really welcome quality infrastructure investment as an opportunity to broaden out this debate, to move on from the narrow focus on financing to embrace a greater range of issues. So finally, and on my final slide, just a few remarks about the principles of quality infrastructure investment. This is the opportunity that we are presented with. And the working group on infrastructure has set out in the policy pack a series of recommendations around the principle. Here's a couple that we think are extremely important. First of all, we need effective and well-resourced state institutions. Even if you accept that it's going to be necessary to mobilize private finance, to augment that from public sources, you still need strong government, who in many cases is going to be the client for the investments, ultimately retains the risk for those investments, and has to regulate the economies in which those investments occur. So don't neglect the state. Very important to build strong state institutions. Secondly, the issues of transparency, accountability, and inclusivity. They're not just slogans, okay? And implementing them can be uncomfortable and challenging, but it's absolutely essential. Transparency is really very fundamental, because without that you can't exercise accountability. Citizens need to be informed about how their tax dollars are being spent. They need to exercise accountability. And infrastructure investment is a fantastic opportunity for inclusivity. Just finally, a range of tools and approaches have been developed by civil society organizations. We make reference to them in the policy pack, and we really recommend that the G20 look at some of the tools and resources that have been developed. Thank you very much for your patience.
We really have to carefully follow the discussion on the G20. I totally agree with you. So, next speaker will be Ms. Yamini Mishra, representing G20 Gender Working Group, please.
Can I go there? I want to see my slides. Just want to begin by saying that all the issues that we've been discussing since the session started, issues of financing, budgeting, just want to remind ourselves that these policies do not play themselves out on a level playing field. These policies play out in the reality of our lives, which is marked by inequality and discrimination. So I just want to focus on gender discrimination, say for instance. There is more than enough evidence to show that women have much less chance of labor force participation. Women's labor force participation rates globally 24 percentage points less than men. Even if women are able to find jobs, they are more likely to be in the informal sector. In fact, if you look at developing countries, 75% of women's work tends to be concentrated in the informal sector. And then there are a whole host of issues. I mean, I can give you a number of statistics on how women's access to financial inclusion, how women's access to social protection, how digital inclusion, all of that is gendered. I just want to begin by saying that the financial and budgeting policy, which does not pay attention to this important aspect, is not good budgeting and financing, and gender responsive budgeting is basically the right way to go. I just want to focus on 4 key points since we have very limited time, and I have 4 slides for you. Just want to begin by saying that in the last decade or so, we have really seen that the global discourse on financing is changing. So we're seeing a large number of international conventions, etc., with the focus now and a commitment to gender responsive budgeting. So I remember my colleagues calling me when the Addis Ababa Action Agenda was being passed, which is the financial architecture for implementing SDGs. And in the first version of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, there was absolutely no mention of gender. And the final declaration that was passed had some 40+ mentions of gender and a commitment to do gender responsive budgeting. Likewise, there I won't get into the details of it, but the SDGs and a whole host of other international commitments now are making an explicit commitment to gender responsive budgeting, which I think is extremely important. And much to it was music to my ears to now realize that PEFA, which is the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability, which really, in a sense, sets the gold standard for public financial management, has recently developed a module on gender and has put it out for public consultation. So just to say that probably it's time to start thinking about budgets in a new way, and the traditional way of looking at it as something which is gender neutral probably has to stop. The next key point is the inclusion of gender responsive budgeting in SDGs. And it's been a big gain for us because one of the indicators, indicator 5C1 of SDG, focuses on gender responsive budgeting. So it says percentage of countries that have systems to track and make public allocations for gender equality. So it's not just tracking gender equality, it's also making public the allocations for gender equality, which I think is important. Now we can debate how good this indicator is. There are limitations which we can discuss, but the fact of the matter is that having GRP included as one of the indicators is a huge step forward, and we're really hoping that now many more countries will start reporting on gender responsive budgeting. The third issue that I wanted to touch on is austerity, because country after country is coming under the grip of these austerity measures, which are being rolled out because of the financial and sovereign debt crisis that has been going on since 2008. And there's much to be said about sovereignty, but we have about austerity, but we have limited time, so I will focus on this one slide, which I think captures the story very well. This is a latest study that has been done by the Women's Budget Group that basically shows that women, and in particular women from low-income households, and within that women who are black, minority and of ethnic backgrounds, are the people who've been most hit by the financial crisis. So I thought this slide captures very well the fact, and in fact it's the UN independent expert on foreign debt, Joanne Pablo, also who's gone on record to say that the current economic system is actually sustained by gender inequality, and it is women's unpaid work that absorbs much of the economic shocks and compensates for austerity measures. Now just the last slide, and I won't get into the details, I'll leave you with this, which is just to say that when we speak about gender responsive budgeting, we must not think about it as one tool which needs to be integrated in one particular cycle of the budget process, but we need to think about the entire budget making cycle from formulation to legislation to implementation in all its stages, and to see how we can integrate gender meaningfully and what are the strategic entry points in each of these phases so that the entire budgeting and planning cycle then contributes to gender equality. Stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The concept of gender responsive budgeting is very important. Thank you very much. And next speaker is Washington from Alzheimer's Japan.
I speak slowly. Good morning again. I don't know you were still on the board, even though Alzheimer's disease is too bad. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for having me here, and I'm very pleased G20 raised aging as an agenda this year. It will be a great chance to start sharing Japanese 50 years experience with other countries, and also including the to be aged in the future. As all of you know, Japan is the most aging country in the world, and elderly population ratio already 28% now. The global population of people 16 and over surpassed 1 billion in 2018. This is the first time in human history. Aging is escalating globally and rapidly. The financial policy is required to adapt and evolve healthcare system toward global aging. The goal is living longer and well. The key issues are NCDs, including nutrition and dementia. So NCDs account for 90% of disease burden among older people. WHO identified NCDs as main threat to human health. The third United Nations high-level meeting on NCDs in 2018 committed to better prepare the health system to respond to the global aging and rapidly globally aging populations. This year, UN high-level meeting on UHC will focus on reducing its exposure to major risk factors such as tobacco, alcohol, unhealthy diet, environmental pollution, and insufficient physical activity. So, recommendation for the NCDs and nutrition. A life course approach to health and NCDs prevention must include appropriate nutrition. Investment is required in tackling NCDs in risk reduction prevention to help mitigate the financial challenge and older people across the whole world. Long-term care expenditure must be considered as integrated component of UHC framework and planning. Enact effective policy to reduce consumption of unhealthy products and promote complete consumption of the healthy product. Example, food labeling, taxation, restriction on marketing of products high in salt and sugar and fat, and create healthy school environments. And enhance availability, affordability, and accessibility of healthy products. And let's move on to dementia. Dementia is not a normal part of aging, but age is the biggest factor. Globally, there are 50 million people living with dementia, and forecast to rise to 1,052 million by 2050. And also, the 60% of them will live in the low and middle income countries. This means millions of people with dementia will face difficulty without UHC and appropriate care. Someone develops dementia every 3 seconds in the world now. Dementia is already $1 trillion a year disease. If we don't start now, the millions of people with dementia will be left behind. Recommendation for dementia. We strongly recommend to invest on aging society now. Ensure multi-stakeholders response to dementia across health, social services, education, employment, justice, and housing sectors. In partnership with people living with dementia and civil society and the private sectors. In which WHO Global Action Plan, Dementia. Well-funded, right-based national dementia plan is essential. Currently, only 30 of the 194 WHO member states have plans. Only 8 countries of the G20 members have. We call G20 to commit and implement fully funded national dementia plans for the present and the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Showing the Japanese experience in the group home by international corporates so the Japanese people can do I agree with things. Thank you very much. So the next speaker is Ms. Renio Katsaskis.
Thank you. I'll try to my slides from here, but then thank you. So thank you, Mr. Miyahara, for highlighting the importance of financing in achieving universal health coverage and for Japan's leadership in including universal health coverage in the finance track. It's so important to get the financing right to ensure quality coverage and make sure that countries can deliver on their commitment to leaving no one behind. So according to Save the Children, 1.2 billion people in 2030 will undergo the hardship of spending at least 10% of their household income on healthcare, and 282 million of them will spend an impoverishing 25% of their income on health. We've heard over the last few days that out-of-pocket payments for healthcare force 10 million people into extreme poverty each year. Government spending on health affects the levels and the impact of out-of-pocket payments. Where spending from governments on health is low, catastrophic out-of-pocket payments inevitably increase to fill the gap. That's why we're calling on all governments to increase equitable public financing to achieve a target of at least 5% of GDP as governments spend on health. The three main reasons we're seeing behind the lack of public investment on health and nutrition systems are narrow tax bases, poor public financial management, and the lack of prioritization for health and nutrition systems by governments. For health systems to be accessible and equitable, they should be paid for from progressive, prepaid, compulsory public financing, such as taxation, or through compulsory social health insurance. Currently, development assistance for health is poorly aligned with the national priorities and can be fragmented as a result of vertical programming. Increasing development assistance for health often means to a decrease in government investment in health systems, which has long-term effects on the sustainability of health systems. Of course, we need to continue development assistance for health, but this needs to be done in such a way that doesn't crowd out domestic resources. Donors must provide transformative aid that supports countries' efforts on child survival and strengthens national capacity and systems on taxation. Of course, donor funding for taxation isn't something new, but aid-funded activities to support domestic resource mobilization, according to UNDP data, account for only 0.13% of total global overseas development assistance in 2015. Donors, and particularly ministries of finance from G20 countries, must support development of credible UHC financing strategies which contain concrete and measurable steps, bringing together ministries of finance and ministries of health. They must work directly with ministries of finance and health to build their confidence in the efficiency and value of investing in health systems. They must support the establishment and strengthening of required finance structures, such as national tax authorities. They must empower countries to make decisions on their own health priorities and improve alignment and effectiveness, both with each other and with recipient country governments. Importantly, the G20 governments must also respect the role of civil society. Civil society organizations are well placed to represent the communities that governments aim to serve and bring their needs and priorities to the forefront, nationally and globally. They have an important role to play in ensuring equity throughout the resource generation and allocation decision-making process. Governments must consult the civil society organizations, including women's and child rights organizations, and children themselves in budget formulation. But to be able to properly monitor revenue raising and allocation, civil society needs to be able to access transparent budget information, engage in budgeting processes, track expenditure, and monitor budgeting processes.
Thank you very much. One of the keywords you use is public financing, and I work with Public Service International as well as a member of Access Network Japan. So I think the campaign for the universal healthcare and the access movement, it's really have to work together. I thank you very much. Okay, before going to the next session, I'd like to make a quick announcement. We'd like to take many questions as possible, so you could prepare, but it should be 1 minute. Comment and your question has to be within 1 minute. I'm not going to turn off your microphone, but please help us to, I want more voices from the floor. And also identify the person who you want to address your question. And please do not address your question to all 6 people. So, okay, next section. 6 panelists representing the civil society organization. Civil society will address a question to Mr. Miyahara, representing the G20 finance track. So let's start from Mr. Yugen Meyer again.
Yeah, my question refers to the so-called public-private partnerships that are also becoming popularized in a way by trade agreements and which are a priority of the G20 presidency already last year. My question is, the G20 last year agreed to promote public-private partnerships as a new asset class for investors. However, there's a lot of experience with these public-private partnerships. Now, they tend to become more expensive for governments and for consumers because they have to generate profits for investors in a sector that used to be non-profit public infrastructure. Most people around the world continue to believe public infrastructure should be held in public hands and should not generate profits for private investors. And that was the standard practice until the 1990s all over the world. And only now these PPPs become a political trend. My question is, why do governments have such a low confidence in themselves as owners and operators of public infrastructure, and why do they believe they need private rent-seeking partners?
Thank you, Mr. Miyahara.
Thank you very much for difficult questions to answer. First I may start with that well, the public-private partnership is one of the various modalities of mobilizing the private finance to the infrastructure investment. And then why need more private sector finance is clearly, and as you all know, that the reality is the public sector has less and less funds to direct to the infrastructure investment. We need funding to fill the huge gap. And then, but at the same time, I totally agree that infrastructure is in many cases serves as a public goods for the local people or the country or the region or globally. So infrastructure development has a proper impact to promote the economic and social development. And so even when we use the PPP for mobilizing the funding, so we need to have proper planning of investment, infrastructure investment. That's why the Japanese government places such an importance on the infrastructure agenda, and have brought to the G20 finance track discussion right after the previous presidencies put a particular focus on how to mobilize the funding and focus on the PPP and the financing model. So in short, maybe quantity in terms of the size of the funding and the quality of investment with enhancing the value on the development impact or the social economic impact. It should go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next person to ask is Mr. John Christensen, but could you just, could you go to the point as possible?
Okay, we're about to see the opening of the second round of the base erosion profit shifting discussions happening under the auspices of G20, organised by the OECD. In the first round, and this is crucial for the entire world, because this will decide how profits and wealth is allocated across the world. In the first round, developing countries were largely excluded from the discussions. Will G20 ensure that developing countries are included in the discussions this time? This is very material to their long-term interests, but I am concerned, and my colleagues are concerned, that the developing countries that have not signed up to BEPS Stage 1 will not be included in BEPS Stage 2. We would like to see all developing countries at the table.
Thank you, Mr. John Christensen, for the confirmation. So, Mr. Gahan, please.
Okay, I may start, confessing that I'm not a true tax expert. So my answer for the question this time may be very short. Well, the BEPS initiative has been sort of, in a sense, land initiative for the G20 finance track now. And while this year the Japanese presidency has kind of moved the tax agenda forward to deal with the taxation under the current the economic environment of technological advancement or whatever. They're promoting the implementation of BEPS certainly stays with the core agenda of the entire, the G20 finance track for years to come, I'm sure. So I hope the G20, even after the Japanese presidency, could keep updating the progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, next person to raise a question is Mr. Peter Matthews, please.
Thank you. My question relates to transparency. The C20 is calling on all G20 governments to be transparent in their investments in infrastructure. There are some limits on transparency, but there is a public interest test, and there are standards to guide what information should be disclosed. So my question is, will the Japanese government lead by example and commit today to disclosing information on all its infrastructure investments, both domestically and internationally? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mihara, please.
Thank you very much for a very, very important question. And transparency comes together with accountability are the very core of the quality agenda of the Japanese presidency, indeed. And yes, well, the Japanese the bilateral institutions are, I hope, are among the leaders of transparency in the world of development finance or infrastructure investment. But our presidency has put particular focus on promoting transparency in the nexus of public debt management, which is very close or which have significant impact on how the infrastructure investment can be planned and implemented. And we are now under intensive discussion on how quality principles captures the transparency and accountability. So the C20's voice to the G20's work on the principles will much appreciated. I hope many G20 countries certainly recognize the value of the transparency and accountability in the infrastructure investment to have this unanimous voice of G20, so that is whole will be very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next is Ms. Yamini Mishra.
So on the one hand, we've been discussing with all the issues from infrastructure to taxation to financial crisis has a very strong gender dimension which cannot and should not be ignored. And on the other hand, we see in many countries this trend where they put commitment, good words, good policies on gender, but these are not backed by adequate financial resources to make them a reality. So my question is that how can these 7 countries, G20 countries make a strong commitment to really move the needle on gender responsibility?
Yes, please.
Thank you for another important question of you. And yes, first of all, no one in the G20 circle would have a question about the gender and the global economic and financial policy making. And then, my personal, understanding is that G20 in the current formulation may not have been sort of forum to serve as a pledging session on any fronts of policies. But with respect to your interest, for instance, the quality infra agenda being discussed now certainly includes the gender elements in the forthcoming principles, and also the global health agenda, or namely the universal health coverage finance. Naturally, should have lots of impact benefiting the women and girls, and strengthening the financing of the much needed health services. So I wish the results of the G20 finance track discussion this year could contribute to something to the global gender agenda.
Some questions, please.
So my question is specific now it refers to dementia. The global forecast growth figure means that the healthcare system will need to adapt and innovate. Enabling people with dementia to live longer in the community is a clear strategic objective to respect their quality of life and also relieve pressure on healthcare budget. So my question is, how can the finance ministry measure the impact of and realize the benefit of enabling people with dementia to live in their community well and longer? And one more, how can the finance ministry support policy shift in this direction?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, certainly dementia is one of the imminent, emerging issue in the global health policy field. And how shall I respond? First of all, sort of a shared understanding which the G20 finance officials have been working to create for the finance ministers will, likely, address the emerging health, problems, including dementia. Although I cannot tell how specific the results will be, but the G20, the finance ministers will likely call for addressing the health issues in the which may value across the country context and the depending on the development stage of the traffic countries. But of course it should pay to start to early rather than later to prepare for the potential health problem like dementia, which may may come out in the developing countries as well. And as for the sort of financial support for addressing the dementia, yes, it may, or it should depend on the country context or the needs of the people in each country as to how to allocate the financial resources in the most efficient way or effective way. But the first step should be that raise awareness among the gravity of the issue of dementia among the policymakers or the people, taxpayers, and then our work of the G20 and the UNC finance or global health finance broadly will help to raise such awareness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I thank all the panelists who read the question very briefly and concisely. I know that it's a challenge. And also, I thank Mr. Miyahara. Actually, I want to mention one remark. He has been very careful with us from the early stage of our preparations, and he is always trying his best to prepare for whatever to our request. I thank you, Mr. Miyahara, for that. So, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's a terrible mistake. The last person is Daniel Constantine.
As you mentioned, we highly value the bringing together of ministries of health and finance at such a high level, but we know how easy it is to lose momentum, and often this doesn't translate into operational plans. So I just wonder, what are the plans for any next steps after the G20 meeting, and how to best integrate equity into any discussions around VHC financing?
Okay, I'll try my best to be short. And then, yes, actually, I very much welcome your point, and then you asked for continuing to work on the health financing of the G20 finance track. And of course, the Japanese presidency will ask for that once our G20 summit or our G20 presidency expires. This year, and then now we are while discussing and working together for the deliverables of this year's work on the UNC financing, and the Japanese presidency has been looking closely at how much interest in the finance officials in the G20 countries are being raised toward the health financing matters. And so, officially speaking, it will be in the hands of the next presidency whether they will carry this agenda over into the next presidency, the next G20 further. But the Japanese presidency will certainly go the next presidency and ask them to for their understanding and support for continuing this agenda. Meanwhile, for instance, right after the G20 summit in the late June, they will have the UN high-level meeting on UPLAN in September, as was already introduced. And also, the Japanese government will host the Global International Conference on African Development, the seventh conference that took place in late August, in which we, the Japanese government, has already established the UHC or Global Health as an established agenda for this African Assistance Conference. So certainly the outcome of the G20 summits this year should inform the progress in the policy reform for the high-level meeting UN for the G7. That's what we can foresee for sure next step.
Thank you very much. So we are moving to the next step. I announced we are going to take a question from the floor at 1 minute. So raise your hands, please. Okay. The gentleman was in front of you.
Thank you very much. My name is Steve Price Thomas from Oxford. Am I the wrong person?
Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Miyahara. I really appreciate your presence, as I'm sure we all do. The World Bank said earlier this year that unless more is done to reduce global inequality, we will fail to reach the SDG target of eliminating extreme poverty by 2030. So my question is, what action is the G20 finance track going to take this year to accelerate the decline in global inequality and thereby ensure that we don't miss the SDG target. Thank you.
Okay, who is going to answer? Yeah, yes. Okay, I think we are going to take more questions.
Hello, I'm Miriam Patricia from SOMO, and I've been working on the policy issues on the financial architecture. I have a particular question to you, because one of the issues on your agenda, as you were mentioning, is we have to deal with the financial markets fragmentation. But basically, if you look at the reports of the IMF, the BIS, and so on, there's a lot of warning there that there's a lot of market volatility and financial market problems because they are too interconnected. You know, the investment funds are becoming very big and very interconnected. So why do you deal with the fragmentation when actually the problem is too much interconnectedness of the global markets? And the second one is what has disappeared now from the agenda is the sustainable finance. If we want to reach the SDGs, we have to stop the financial sector to finance fossil fuel companies, everything that is increasing climate change, and also companies that are abusing labor rights, etc. So where will the financial ministers ensure that the financial sector are supporting the SDGs and the climate change agenda? Thank you.
Okay, the question is to Mr. Miyakara. Yesterday we had a panel on international solidarity levy. Is there a risk that the race of nationalism in several G20 countries will make these international solidarity taxes fail? Or in the best of the cases, use this solidarity levy in order to replace international development aid, the traditional one? Because the politics of nationalism in G20 countries can be a real danger to global solidarity. Do you see it that way? Do you think it might be a risk?
Okay, I'm coming back to take more questions.
Thank you very much for interesting and important questions, respectively. The first question about the declining the interest in the SDGs goals, and especially with respect to the keeping equality and sorry, misheard the question, and how G20 could change the course. To be frank, the finance agenda may not be addressing your interest, directly. But I would say, first of all, everything that about the development-related agenda, including public infrastructure or the literacy financing, or also the better preparedness or response to the natural disaster and its financing, also our development-related agenda, and also recovering the sustainability of the low-income countries, also another important development-related agenda. But all these items are, ultimately for achieving the sustainable development goals in the broad sense. And I hope at the end of the summit, G20 summit, we can find many relevant issues being discussed or being agreed on in outcome documents. And as for your question, number two, so where is the agenda of sustainable financing gone? A very good question. And yes, maybe the visibility of this agenda item may have been lost somewhat this year if compared with the last year's agenda. But again, for instance, in the quality infra investment discussion, we are working on the one of the principles which will address the importance of designing the good infrastructure with the better resilience to natural disasters, which it used to be part of the sustainable financing agenda, and also the principles will likely call for more better environmental considerations, and we may call for continued or enhanced level of green finance. So while the sustainable finance has not appeared on the list of agenda items this year, but the essence of the green finance or sustainable finance that has been certainly embedded in the infra, as far as I know. And then as for the third question, solidarity levy. To be honest, I don't remember quite well this issue. It has become a clear G20 finance agenda in the past. But this question relates to the nationalism and how it is impacting the G20 work. And the answer may depend on who observes the G20 work or discussion on the floor. But at least I personally do not feel such a strong influence of the emerging nationalism possibly somewhere in the world. And the G20 has so far successfully kept sort of coherence or the spirit of working together for the global
Thank you very much. I try to take one or two questions. Next person, Professor Hirono, please.
Thank you very much. Hirono speaking. All the recommendations given by all of you here, all wonderful recommendations, and from civil society will accept as such. Yeah, wonderful. However, in order to implement all the recommendations you have suggested, from different angles, as Mr. Mehara said, we need money. Okay. In terms of the raising the money, not only in Japan, but also at the global level, as we have already discussed, it's so important to have a new energy or rigor to introduce, once Mr. Tobin said, about global tax. And this is something which we are very anxious for Japanese government to push forward at the G20 summit, that will support all the efforts of the Prime Minister Abe to really mobilize finance, not just from one country or other country, but from the entire world. Because I see so much richness in developing countries. Rich people in developing countries are far richer than many of us in the developed countries also. And therefore, it's important that we should really levy taxes on rich people. I don't care whether they are from developing country or developed country. We think so. Please, with the Prime Minister Abe, when he goes to the summit in Osaka, that the Ministry of Finance will completely support him in terms of raising this kind of international taxation. Thank you.
Thank you. I take the last question, the gentleman.
My name is Dennison and I'm from Malaysia. Congratulate all the speakers for your comprehensive presentation. My comment on the financial track is that while a lot of various issues were raised, both by the Ministry of Finance in Japan, as well as the civil society response, but there was no articulation on alternative financial movements that are there on the ground, which are challenging market capitalism through alternative forms such as social solidarity economy. Among G20 members, for example, like Brazil, there is tremendous examples of solidarity economy on the ground, as well as from Korea, the social enterprise movement, which is setting an alternative framework consistent with empowering local grassroots communities. My question for this panel is, to what extent would G20 provide alternative financing to promote greater collaboration on grassroots, community-based, which also includes majority women, through either self-help groups, fair trade, cooperatives, ecotourism? Where is that voice from the ground that is setting an alternative financial architecture that is challenging the dominant force that is creating inequality, discrimination, and isolation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we get a response from the panelists and Mr. Miyata, and then we are closing the session. Sorry, who are supposed to explain? Please go on.
I wanted to respond to one point that the professor made around it takes money to deliver some of these things, and that's true to a large extent. Going back to my main theme of my discussion, transparency, it's also about saving money. One of the challenges for the quality infrastructure investment approach is that currently, probably on average, 1/3 of investment is lost through corruption, mismanagement, and inefficiency. And in some investments, that would be much higher. For example, if corruption means that a road is poorly constructed and eventually falls into complete disrepair, I would suggest 100% of that investment has gone through corruption. So transparency and accountability can reduce corruption, mismanagement, and inefficiency. So you could potentially get 1/3 additional productive investment just through efficiency savings without having to immobilize any additional finance. So saving money, improving efficiency is also extremely important.
If I might, some of you might remember the young historian speaking at the World Economic Forum in January said, taxes, 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 all the rest is bullshit. And I agree with the point. I think one of the key failures of the G20 countries lies with the fact that for 30 years they've been engaged in an ideological game of tax competition. For economists, this is a political nonsense. They've been giving money away, tax money away to big corporations to attract investment. It hasn't worked. Einstein, of course, famously said, a sign of idiocy is to continue to pursue the same thing, hoping you'll arrive at a different result. And G20, I think, is guilty of this. They are still pursuing tax competition, giving away subsidies, tax holidays. This is a fool's errand and should be reversed. Raise taxes, particularly taxes on the wealthy, redistribute that, get that money circulating back into local economies, and we'll see a remarkable change in the circumstances, domestic circumstances, across most countries.
I also would like to thank the professor for his question. I am a good old fiscal conservative. I want to reintroduce the tax rates of 1990, and then we will never ever hear again a government official complain about lack of money. I know in my country 80% of the people are in favor of that, but 80% of the political establishment are against that. And that's the heart of the problem in my country, and I'm sure it's the heart of the problem in many other countries as well.
Any other person to reply or comment, Mr. Miha, or?
You may have much more to say, so that is time for panelists.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, that's fine. Okay. Now, sorry, okay, microphone back to your please.
So thank you very much. I think we had a great discussion, and we saw that there are huge gaps in financing, transparency, accountability, but also there are solutions and prescriptions for sustainable and more equitable system policies. And I think we need to push for the political will of the G20 leaders, where civil society play a great role towards the G20 summit and beyond. So before I close the session, we would like to give a huge round of applause to the great panelists. Thank you so much, Mr.